for us to continue. Thank you. I just got the message. Thanks. Welcome, folks. This is the first meeting of the steering group for the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. I just want to do a couple of housekeeping pieces before I start with the agenda. You will hear us discuss that we're coming to wrap our heads around some norms about how we will hold meetings and participation. One thing that I would like to ask, if you didn't already hear me ask this, if you are participating from the public, if you could keep your camera off until you are speaking or engaging as public comment. That is simply because on the current platform, I can't see, I see people whose cameras are on and I can't always see members of the steering group. We may have a better way of addressing that for future meetings, but if you could do that, that would be great. Welcome. So I'm going to do just a quick roll call of the steering group, and then I will get us started. I'm Megan Roy. I am the chair of the commission, and I'm going to call folks that I see in order of my screen. So Jennifer, you're first.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Jennifer Deck Samuelson. I'm chair of the State Board of Education. Thanks.
Thank you. Peter?
Peter Conlon from the Vermont House.
Thank you. Zoe?
Good afternoon. Zoe Saunders, Interim Secretary of Education.
Nicole?
Hi, Nicole Mace, representing the Vermont School Boards Association.
Thank you. And Anne?
Ann Cummings, Vermont Senate.
Thank you. And we are missing one steering group member, Craig Bolio, who is the 6th member of the steering group. I'm going to just sort of kick us off. This is a steering group specified in the law, and this is our first meeting. It is a committee of the commission, a subcommittee of the commission. And I just want to put some context behind the agenda that I offered, and I use the word offer by design because I am hoping that steering group members will suggest adjustments if they need to change the order. As you knew already from our first meeting and have gotten a sense of from the input that we've gotten to date, we have to wrap our heads pretty quickly around how the commission will approach its work. And the steering group, which is U6, is charged with coordinating and developing a work plan for that. I think the quicker that we can make it clear and understandable to the public about how we plan to tackle the charge that the commission has been given, the better and more confident the public will be in the work of the commission. That confidence is really important for those who did participate in the first meeting. I think we all agree that this is critical work and it has a very tight timeline. So I've offered this agenda and am not wed to it and hope that steering group members will make adjustments. And I really did it with a workflow focus because I think that we are going to need to identify how you will suggest to the commission that they approach the work. How do we leverage existing work happening around the state? So that's what this agenda is offered. So with that, are there amendments to the agenda that any steering group members would like to offer?
Megan, I don't know if it's an amendment to the agenda, but I do think it'd be useful to spend a couple minutes clarifying your role vis-a-vis the steering committee because the legislation wasn't clear, and I'd love for you to be empowered to, develop agendas and support this group, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page about that before we get too far down the road.
I would welcome that conversation. So since it doesn't really specifically look like it is in there, I think I will add that as our initial agenda item.
Sounds good.
Let me just say too, Megan, I really appreciate you taking the initiative to putting this for the agenda together. I think that's really helpful, and it's always easier to have something to work off of. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay. Seeing no other suggestions, I would appreciate that conversation. So kind of to Jennifer's point and Nicole, what you raised, it isn't clear exactly what the role of the chair is. Just for really clear logistical meetings, it would be difficult to facilitate and coordinate the commission if I were not part of this table, but I'm not necessarily named as part of your group, or the chair is not named. And so I do think there's going to need to be a fair amount of work behind the scenes, because it isn't just building agendas, it's building how to have the agendas and how we're going to hold discussions. The steering group decides how, at a high level, what are the principles we're going to use, what are the decision-making strategies, but from an organization standpoint, there is a fair amount of work. And so that's my perspective. I am happy to take that work, or a portion of it, as desired by the steering group.
I'll just add, I don't think it makes sense to have different chairs managing this work. And so I would support by group consensus that you would serve as the chair of this committee as well, in order to ensure the work is paced, aligned, and moves forward. Eager to hear what others think.
I strongly agree, and I really do as well appreciate Megan, you stepping up and kind of getting things rolling and kicked off. And I think for the sake of continuity and making sure that we're all moving in the same direction, both the steering committee and the larger commission, you sort of provide that thread. So I would support you continuing to sort of chair our work. I also would just take a moment to repeat what you said earlier. For those folks who aren't on the commission or on the steering committee, if you could turn off your cameras until called upon to speak, that would be helpful to all of us.
So, and let me just add, because I want to make sure I understood what you were offering, Megan. I mean, I think I see you have either you could facilitate the steering group, but not really be an active participant, or you could be an active participant and also be the chair. And I guess I would want to make sure that you were willing to serve as chair, fair question, of the steering committee, and also understand, are you seeing your role as being a facilitator or an active participant?
That is a good question. I think what I am voicing is just the need to facilitate. I believe the law is clear that the steering group is the entity that develops this. It is a group of 6. I don't know that you will need a chair in the sense of voting and breaking a tie. I'm not sure the work lends itself to that. So I think in my mind, it is a facilitation. I would imagine, as you develop a work plan and propose that to the commission, someone will need to do the work to craft that, to be able to then make sure the agendas of the commission are connected to that, which feels a little bit more like a facilitation role, I think was the picture in my head, unless others have a different thought. I also would just say I'm relatively comfortable sharing my thoughts, and I certainly will do that if I have an idea for how to have a conversation or a way to structure an agenda item that maybe gets us to where the steering group wants to be. I would certainly do that. It would be your decision, though, as to how you did that. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
I would just say I'm supportive of that approach. I think it does create continuity and some strategic alignment, which would be very helpful for the work. And as we move forward and contemplating what subcommittees may be established, I think that's where we need to kind of think through what that structure would look like on the subcommittees, and establishing probably chairs for the subcommittees to kind of focus on specific content areas. And then, as we discussed at the last meeting, creating that feedback loop for those subcommittee chairs to then report out through the steering committee as we move forward with thinking about the broader structure. just wanted to offer that.
Any other thoughts or input before I revoice what I think I heard? I think there's a level of support for me taking the role as facilitator of this group. And I am comfortable playing that role. I think largely it will be facilitating. I think the steering group, as it gets into decision making, I suppose you would discover whether or not you needed a different role. But and Zoe, I think that is largely on my mind, that sort of feedback loop between this steering group, the full commission, the public, subcommittees. I think those are all pieces of our work that are going to have to be important. So I do hope we can start to strategize about that. Okay. Thank you, Nicole, for raising that. I'm just going to continue with this in the order it is. If we move around, I'm guessing our conversations will overlap quite a bit. So I'm just going to move us through. So I did put for this group to have a conversation about its regular meetings. And I think it's pretty important at least to talk about frequency and structure of these meetings / work sessions, because I do think that they are both. I think they are work sessions for the steering group. And so whether or not this is actually picking the date and time, I'm not sure. We can possibly do that offline, but I think it's worth a conversation. A lot of, in particular, we have a deliverable back to the commission before the commission can come back together. But also, I think more regularly, what is the frequency that this group feels it needs to meet? And is it more frequent, shorter meetings? Is it longer work sessions, less frequently? So I wanted to have that kind of conversation.
Can I chime in? I think probably to start out, we're going to need to meet more frequently once we develop the work plan and we kind of chart out, then it will be either the full commission or subcommittees, whatever we decide to go with, that will start meeting. And then probably as we progress, we'll have to meet more often in order to bring all the conclusions from other groups together.
Thanks, Anne.
We still have some guests with their cameras on. They can shut those off.
Yeah, Nicole?
I just wondered whether I think the statute or the bill talks about no more than 30 meetings, right? And I think that's inclusive. Is that inclusive of all committee meetings, right? So there does need to be some strategy, I think, associated with not exhausting the number of meetings. I suppose we could always go back to the legislature and ask for permission to meet some more, but that's a factor we should just be paying attention to.
Yeah.
I think being mindful of the number of committees we stand up and the restrictions in terms of the meetings, at least meetings where we can be compensated for attending. I think that's where that restriction comes from. So.
Yeah, the way I read that, I agree with you, Nicole, but I think we're limited to 30 meetings that are reimbursed. And so then I suppose there's a question about, we can meet as many times as we want and not be reimbursed. I think the suggestion about meeting more frequently up front, I do feel like we've got a lot of structure that we need to impose to really get this rolling. And we do have a rather ambitious timeline if we have to have a work plan in place by September 15th and initial recommendations by December 15th. So I don't know. I mean, that to me sounds like one meeting per month of steering committee and separately commission. But maybe we need to think about doing it more frequently at the beginning and then spacing it in the middle, or having a discussion about meeting and not getting reimbursed for it.
Yep,
I
Zoe.
think I think it might be helpful for us to do some backwards planning around this to identify how we need to structure ourselves to advance the key deliverables. And I think to many people's points, there may be a need for us to do a couple short sprints, if you will, in the next within this month to make sure that we're really finalizing that work plan in a way that's going to be structured and supportive of achieving our goals, and then from there establish a regular cadence based on the work product that we need to deliver. So it might be helpful for us to kind of establish, put maybe a pin in this for now and say that we know we need to establish a cadence, and we might be open to having some shorter frequencies in the front end, and then maybe come back to this conversation after we've had a chance to really think strategically around what we're charged to deliver, and based on that timing, make some recommendations by the close of this meeting on how what that cadence should be.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So the shorter term backward design in my mind at minimum is the December deliverable and the September deliverable. And since part of what we're doing today is deciding how we're chunking the work, that's probably a more fruitful discussion to start with. So if folks are okay with it, why don't we move on to that? So it's written in the agenda as commission structure. Maybe a better way to phrase it would be how we're approaching the work. I think that it makes sense to review each element of what the commission is charged to do and start with that. I'll share what I see as chunked out items, because some of the elements are much larger than others. And then I do think this is less of an element by itself, but I also think the steering group should have a conversation about criteria, or Zoe's words from a earlier conversation we had, guiding principles. What is the mechanism that this group will recommend to the commission to be able to hold up recommendations or drafts or thinking against as it does its work? And I think that needs to be consistent, so that even if some of our work is divided up. So that's a separate element, but I think it's an important one. I'm going to start by throwing out the chunks, for lack of a better word, that I can see. They may not be the perfect way to chunk the work, so I would let the group discuss. One, communication and engagement by itself, even though this crosses every piece of work the commission will do, the law is pretty clear about needing to have deep engagement with specifically named stakeholders, with the public, and with other stakeholders as the commission decides. So I see communication and engagement as a body of work. Obviously, the education finance portion is its own body of work. I don't mean to suggest that any of these are separate. We recognize they all overlap, but the finance also has the earliest deadline of preliminary recommendations by December. Governance, resources, and administration, that's sort of structural in my mind, and talks about both agency and state board, but it feels like it's its own chunk. And then education delivery system. Again, some of these have lots underneath. And then I see a chunk of role of public schools. I don't know if that is its own chunk or if that's kind of related to delivery system. Why don't I start with, are there other pieces of work that I'm missing, or are these the right way to chunk the work? Yeah, Jennifer.
Well, I'm thinking about the construction funding, and I'm not sure where to slot that.
That's really going to be, I think that's where we just have to stay in tune and in line with the work of the legislative committee that's addressing that. But I would say that, that's on a different track. We need to be aware of it. We need to stay in contact, but it's not a chunk that this commission necessarily needs to take on.
I
Meg,
think to that point, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering if you could give a couple of examples of what you think would fall under the ed delivery system.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about some of the under policy recommendations. It talks about physical size and footprint of the education system, workforce development, the role of tuition programs, designation, therapeutic schools, um, legal and financial impact. Those are some of the things that I picked up that are, and again, these are not hard lines between the topics, because many of these are also financial and they're also about the role of public schools. But when I was looking at that list of policy recommendations, those felt like delivery system.
I wonder if we might expand that bucket to education delivery system and outcomes. As I think part of what I know a lot of us have had a conversation around is creating that balance as we think about a sustainable system that also creates equitable opportunities and outcomes for our students. And so just making sure that we're very focused on that component as well, as not just the delivery, but the outcomes.
Yeah. And
Megan, as I emailed, I think it might be helpful. We've got this commission that has a massive scope that we can deal with. But to me, it would be helpful if we started out by agreeing on, is there a problem? What is it, or plural, it's, because that's an, and I'm going to have to bow to Representative Conlon because his committee ultimately put this together. The Ed Committee in the Senate just played with numbers. They didn't change much, but why are we doing this now? We talk about equity and sustainability several times, but we never say there is a problem. And what is it? What are we trying to do? I think we all know that school budgets went down, and we've got a brewing taxpayer revolt out there. When the new healthcare costs come in, I think we're going to have a real possibility of a revolt. But my committee's focused on money. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, that we're all here to solve the same problems. And then that will give us some guidance as to what the goals are. What I think the principles will probably stay the same, but what the goals are.
yeah, Nicole.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. I totally agree. I would maybe, the way I've been thinking about it is what's a reality that we can all agree to,
Yeah.
right? So let's set a foundation of shared understanding. And then, I mean, ultimately this commission is supposed to produce a vision for public education, right? That will encompass all the buckets that Megan talked about. But I think in order to say where you want to go, it's really important that you know where you are today. And, when I was with the School Boards Association from 2011 to 2019, that was a lot of the work that we did with our membership, was to develop a set of metrics and indicators that painted a picture, not just on the finance side, but on the outcome side. And that really helped, I think, the field engage in, problem solving, solutions solving, developing a vision. And I think we've sort of lost our way with that, largely due to COVID. And I think we need to refocus. And I think a great way to start that work would be to, you know, I've got a whole list of data that I think it would be great for us to look at to ground, you know, how do we either have a shared understanding of the problems, but also the strengths, the opportunities, because ultimately we have to chart a course forward. And we can't do that if we're not clear where we are today.
Thank you. Zoe and then Jennifer.
I think these are all really good points, and it's very important for us to be able to articulate the current state so that we can envision that future state. And I believe it'll be very important that we do that in a way that's data-driven, participatory, and inclusive. As we approach this work, I think we've all commented on kind of the enormity of the scope of this work. And so one of the guiding principles that I might offer is to really leverage some of the work that's underway through different organizations and associations so that we can really leverage that learning and that expertise to inform the work of the steering committee and the commission. And so to that end, I would offer some, I think of what the Agency of Education is doing as one avenue that we can learn from. I also know that a number of other organizations are in the process of doing data collection, such as the School Board Association and others, that I think are really important for us to bring in to this full conversation. So from an agency perspective, we are in the process of rolling out our listen and learn approach. When I first came to Vermont, I mentioned that was going to be kind of important for me in my new role. And that scope has expanded to not just be about me learning about Vermont and our school system, but really engaging the Agency of Education and working very closely in partnership with our community to identify the priorities and how we can best support as an agency in aligning our work and our expertise to advance the goals of the community communities across the state. And so to that end, what we will be doing is putting together first some data reporting. And that data reporting will include both academic and non-academic indicators to give us a comprehensive view of the current state of education in Vermont, and also begin to look at kind of some comparisons around regional nuances and comparisons by kind of similar both school and community demographics to help us kind of understand educational delivery within our state. And then from there, we're looking to really utilize this data to really engage in deeper conversations with our education leaders across the state in understanding kind of what is kind of contributing to things that are making us really successful as a system, and what are some challenges and opportunities for us all to work collaboratively together. And then beyond that, to host probably more of the October timeframe, or the traditional listen and learn, where we'll be able to get broad-based input from the community and engaging in these conversations. So certainly this work will inform the Agency of Education in developing our strategic plan as we move forward. But my hope is also that as we're doing this work, we're intentional about how we organize and structure it in a way that is supportive of the Commission's goals as well, and gives input and insight that could be beneficial to this body of work as well. So I offer that because I think we're at a really interesting time where we're just beginning to do that work. We're expecting our data reports really next month, and then the successive activities to come thereafter, and just think there's a lot of synergy that we can capitalize on to support the work of the Commission.
Thanks, Zoe. That's really helpful, and we may want to come back to that in more depth, especially around leveraging the existing work and data. So I want to come back to that. Jennifer.
Thanks. So one of the things that I've been really mulling over as I was getting ready for today's meeting is, I was looking at, and Megan, this is actually like page 2 of your slide deck from our last meeting about the creation. And this was taken from the Act. The Commission shall study the provision of education in Vermont and make recommendations for a statewide vision for Vermont's public education system to ensure that all students are afforded substantially equal and educational opportunities in an efficient, sustainable, and stable education system. And I guess one of the things that I go back to is who is defining opportunities, or should we define opportunities? Because my sense is that that means different things to different people. And you know, are we talking about the educational offerings at a school? Are we talking about, you know, where students go when they graduate? Like, what is the measure of an opportunity? So I think that, to me, would also be really important to understand, you know, where are we now? And to, you know, Anne's point, what problem are we trying to solve? Where do we want to go? But what does that look like? And I think it would be really helpful to think about these words that maybe we don't all have the same assumption as to what they mean and what we're trying to do with them.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about in general is the extent to which we need to define that, or the extent to which we need to decide how we're going to define that, because I would offer that that is the purpose of this commission, is actually to share its belief after research and engagement about what they mean by opportunities and what are the opportunities that all Vermont students need access to, and at what grain size are we. I mean, at some point we will have to select a grain size, but and so I'm coming back to this idea of leveraging existing work, looking at identifying the reality, which really also means looking at data, looking at history. And does this group want to do that about each element of the charge? Or is that, in other words, and maybe Nicole, you talked about, you have some thoughts on some data we would need to look at. Is it best to look at it that way, like here's the data, or is it best to have that conversation in the context of communication and engagement? I'll give one more example and then I'll stop talking. Zoe, you just gave a pretty in-depth example of existing work that is about engaging the public on these issues and using data, which may be a process that's existing that we don't need to duplicate, and then our group would need to then pick that up. So what's the best way to articulate the issue? Is it to do that by each of these elements, or is it to start with a broader conversation? I didn't offer that as a very articulate question, so I hope the steering group can pick up the thread.
Yeah, and when I mentioned data indicators, I sort of looked at the different issues that the commission is expected to review, and then also drawing from my own experience of doing a roadshow around the state, looking at, you know, I think we need to be honest about the fact that we've been having this conversation in Vermont for well over 2 decades, right? And so to try to restate the problem or engage in a lengthy back and forth about what are the challenges facing our public education system, to me feels exhausting, as someone who did that for the better part of a decade. So I do think, however, we do need to refresh our collective understanding of where things are at today. And so I basically identified a set of indicators that I think are useful based on the breadth of the charge and what I believe is pretty readily available. And Secretary Saunders, I don't know whether your data presentation is going to touch upon things like ed spending and the breakdown of how we're spending our $1.8 billion education payment. I don't know whether it's looking at sources and uses of the ed fund, where it's looking at current state of governance, or whether it's mostly focused on what's happening in terms of outcomes for students and programs. So definitely think we do not need to recreate the wheel or have parallel processes happening where we're engaging in the same analysis or information gathering. And I want to make sure that everybody on the commission has a sense of the breadth of the challenge because it is so interconnected. And so I'd be worried about saying like, okay, this group is working on this, so they're only going to have access to this data, or we're only going to prioritize the funding data first because that's the deadline that we have to work with.
And I can respond to that too, Nicole. I think one thing just to share is that this is a big lift, right, for us to really take on this massive data analytic and reporting process. And so we are looking at doing this in phases. And I certainly make the commitment to sharing with the steering committee where we are at each iteration, because I think it's helpful for you to see what we're putting together. The full intent is to bring together really cross-functional set of indicators that look at academic outcomes, but financial budget spending, facility needs, some of the kind of conditions of that are needed for academic support in terms of kind of wraparound support and services. So it really is looking, we're trying to get to the breadth of understanding of the whole system, but we recognize that we may not be able to do that in the first iteration, and are in the process of kind of prioritizing as we have that ability to bring data to the forefront. Some conversation we've had is the importance of I think to Nicole's point of everyone having that shared understanding. I think we tend to look at data in silos, and so this is an opportunity for us to kind of triangulate data and to get a broader sense and understanding of those factors that are contributing both to the success of our system and where we have some challenges. So I just offer that as a consideration as we move forward, and also level setting expectation that this will be a process, but that is the intent as we move forward, to have a very comprehensive understanding.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you know whether we have the support of the Joint Fiscal Office for this committee? Because there's some pieces of work that maybe the agency may not have the capacity, or maybe easier to sort of parcel out some of it. Or is it the intent that this would be the work of a consultant if the agency is unable to do the work?
I think that Senator Cummings and I could probably make a request of JFO, but they are not specifically tasked with supporting this commission. They have a lot of information readily available, and a lot of experience in doing the analysis that we may need. And I don't think that they would be against doing it if it weren't a heavy lift for them.
Yep, Zoe.
The other thought I had as we talked about building shared understanding, certainly the data tells one part of the story, but I think Vermont's had a lot of conversations around the vision of our system and what makes us unique. And so being relatively new to Vermont, I've been reminded around a lot of that. And I think there is value in bringing forward some of the work that has been done in the past. It's more qualitative in describing what the vision of Vermont system is, to say, does that continue to be the vision of our system? Are there other elements that we think are important to add? And then there may also be the conversation of that may hold true to the vision, but there may be implementation challenges, right? And that's a different conversation. So in terms of a tangible next step, what might be helpful is to pull together some of those prior documents that have been more oriented toward the vision of Vermont education system, so we can reflect on that and see if that holds true as a starting point.
Yep, Anne.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that as we form this vision, it is done in the context of what the Vermont tax base can afford. Because those are we can develop a beautiful vision, but if we can't afford it, it's not going anywhere. And sorry, the tax commissioner isn't here today, but I think they have, we've done information, we've done studies on how much money a certain tax would raise, how much taxing capacity we have, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would offer and I don't mean this naively, but I think it's a both and. I think what it means is that when there's a vision about this is what education needs to look like, and the idea that it has to be affordable is that's not an option, that's not negotiable. So it really is, what are the sacrifices then in certain areas that would need to be made in order to move forward the things that aren't negotiable on the programmatic end. That's what I mean by both and. I saw your eyebrows go up, and I didn't mean cost, but I do think that that's part of why this commission is charged with looking at both. If it were only charged with the sustainability part, they would just be looking at finances. So a question that I have for the group hearing this conversation is it a better idea for either this group or this group and then the full commission to do a data dive first before identifying how to chunk the work out? Still obviously needing to work backwards from those two dates. But the reason I say that is because, so for example, Nicole's list of data, Zoe's list of a description of existing work may narrow the scope of the body of work that would then need to be done against each one of our elements. And that might be more helpful to then say, this is work that's best done by the full commission. This is work that could be a subcommittee. And I wonder if looking at that data is a better starting point. And I use data loosely because I think we also need to generate what is it we mean when we say we need to look at it.
Just for clarification, Megan, are you suggesting the steering committee look at that, or that this be sort of like the first big chunk of at least information receiving of the commission? I guess I'm sort of seeing in my head spending a half a day meeting that goal of us agreeing, where are we? And can we all agree that these are the challenges that we're facing?
I actually think you articulated the question, because I don't know if that is the work of the steering group so that you can then suggest a work plan, or if that is a piece of the work plan by itself that you are asking the commission to do. I don't have an answer to that question, but I think you just sort of articulated the question.
Yeah. Well, I think the way I asked it, I sort of feel like it probably establishing everybody in agreement on sort of baseline where we are and what we're dealing with, meaning the whole commission, is probably a good start to the big work ahead.
Nicole.
I agree that this is, the full commission needs to engage with the data and arrive at a shared sense of reality in terms of where we're starting from. And I think this group can help by, first of all, I don't know how quickly we could obtain some of this data. I suspect that much of it is easily obtainable, but in my experience, presenting the data and framing it in a way can be very helpful in terms of, so just inundating folks with raw data may not be a productive use of the full commission's time, but we as a steering committee could, number one, decide what's the priority data request, and then look at that together and decide the best way to engage a full commission in, responding to that, not just the data, but also the work that's already been done around Vermont's vision for public education. But that giving sort of people a bunch of raw data and raw reports may not work as well given the limited time that we have. So we could sort of help steer that process.
I wonder if part of that process or developing the process as a steering group is simultaneously looking at data, but also identifying what data doesn't exist yet and when it might exist. Because if we are looking at a list of things that we think we need in order to make recommendations, then we can say, we have this, we don't have this, we don't have this, and we really need to get it. And then we would be recommending to the commission a way to get it. Or we might say, we don't have this and it's not a priority for the most upcoming deliverable. So in other words, it's a spending time doing both a data analysis and also a data like gap identification to help us figure out what we need and don't need. Jennifer.
So I think this is important, but I'm a little bit concerned because I forget now who said it, that it's going to take time if we request this information. It's going to take time to get it. And then we need to, familiarize ourselves with it. And then we also need to familiarize the whole commission with it. I'm just worried that this is going to take a lot of time that maybe we don't have. And if I'm not saying that it's not important, but I'm wondering if maybe we should keep this higher level at the moment. And, just punting, I think we can all agree that what we have heard is that tax rates are higher than many Vermonters would like them to be. So that tells me that the commission needs to work on lowering, finding ways that will effectively lower the tax rate. And I think we're also hearing that, student outcomes, however that is defined, and I think there are a number of different metrics, are not as high as one would expect given the amount of money that we're spending per pupil. So I'm wondering if it might be worthwhile to sort of think about high level, what can we do to, sort of bring down costs and or both improving student outcomes. Because I don't think that data would be helpful, but I think that data is going to confirm what we already are hearing.
Anne, and then Zoe, I think.
Yeah, I think Jennifer just laid out the problems as I understood it, just from a legislative perspective. There's concern about the cost, and there's definitely concern in the community about the cost. And there's concern that for what we're spending, our outcomes aren't top rate. And I think we could, there is just so much data out there. You can get yourself just inundated and spend 3 months just trying to dig your way out. I think that's what I meant. If we could agree that those are the base problems that we're trying to solve, then we could start and we could find the data. But at least that's what the rumor is in the legislature, that those are the realities on the ground.
Thanks, Anne. Zoe?
So I was just thinking that you're right there. As you start looking at data, this is going to be a long process, and there's some information that we may not have at our fingertips right now, and also that this can be overwhelming. So really framing this is going to be important. I think what I could offer is, for the next steering committee, at least from the agency perspective, being able to share, what we have that can be reported out that would be, I think, relevant and actionable related to kind of the two priority areas that we're surfacing related to, the financial component of being sustainable and also the outcome component. As we dive deeper, I think the next part that we get into is really thinking through what are some of the solutions or menu of options, right, that we can look at. And I think that's kind of what both Senator Cummings and Chair Samuelson are alluding to. I think there's a lot of value in looking at kind of the variability across our system to identify where there are some real exemplars of how things are working very well and modeling that also. So I think as we do move forward, there is value in doing that deeper dive, just to understanding that there are different ways of operating schools that are effective, and those may depend on also some of the community demographics and factors, and staffing and a lot of other conditions. And so I would just encourage us to also look within too at that there's variability and there's different ways that we can share how our education system is being delivered across the state, as models and as a reference point as we start to think through potential solutions or recommendations in the future.
Thanks, Zoe. Peter?
So ultimately, it's education spending that was the genesis of this commission, and its impact on tax rates, the reaction of Vermonters to it. And I think at a minimum, we could begin, while we might wait for some of this more exhaustive data to come forward, we can at least begin getting the commission all on the same page of this is what education spending is. This is where it goes. And this is, but also make sure everybody's got a picture of what our system is. Is everybody on the commission fully aware of how many high schools we operate? How many of them are union high schools? How many of them have more than 500 kids? How many of them have fewer than 100 kids? So I think that there is some basic grounding we can have to get started. And maybe everybody, we have a very knowledgeable group, but maybe for the benefit of the broader community, we sort of put it all out there. And so we do start with that very base level understanding and consensus over, are we spending too much, too little? Is the system that we have? I don't see us going into questions of how we're going to finance the school system. It's more about what we're spending and how we spend it effectively.
Thanks, Peter. Jennifer, and then Nicole.
Thanks. So just touching on what I think I heard Zoe say, and I like how Peter sort of framed the first phase, but I think what would be really helpful and instructive is if the agency has the capacity to sort of crunch the data further to say, here are school districts within the state who have that seem to be getting good value for their tax rate. And again, I mean, I'm throwing in things that we're going to have to sit around and define, like, what does good value mean? But, just conceptually, are there districts out there that have a lower tax rate, a relatively lower tax rate, and relatively higher outcomes? And what do those districts look like? Because it would be really helpful to then say, okay, here's a portrait of a school district, a town with a manageable tax rate. What are they doing, and how could that be emulated by other towns throughout the state? So I don't know. I mean, if the agency can sort of, go into that next level of analysis to crunch that data, I would love to see that.
That's the direction that we are.
Great.
Nicole.
So the reason I think it's important to spend the time looking at the data is that, yes, on a global level, I think there's consensus. We spend $2.3 billion to educate 80,000 students. Our outcomes are not equitable, and our buildings are falling apart. Like, that in a nutshell is what we're confronting. I think was a lot of the conversation as I followed it in the legislature that led to the creation of this commission. But we're supposed to come up with a vision and some policy recommendations. And I don't feel comfortable doing that unless we've had an opportunity to engage at a deeper level in terms of what could be driving that. So we've got a large price tag. There are innumerable factors that go into that because of the complexity of our delivery system, because of the differences in in our rural communities versus some more urban districts like Winooski. So I do think it's really important not to get bogged down, but that we start with a request that puts in motion the need to collect this data. And the agency, as I'm appreciative, Secretary Saunders, of the offer to say, this is what we have. I'd also like us to say, this is what we want. Do you have it? If you don't, fine, maybe joint fiscal has it, or maybe we need to engage it. That will also help us understand, like, do we need to hire a consultant at this phase? And if so, what's the work, the scope of work for that? Like I said, I have a list of things. I'm happy to email it. I'm happy to share my screen now, but it's hard. I think we're getting a little bit spun up because it's like data in abstract as opposed to, you know, here are some buckets that I think are important for us to put in motion a data collection.
I agree. I hear, frankly, three buckets from this conversation, and maybe so I'm going to offer those. It's also very similar to how a school district would triangulate its data. So one is sustainability and cost. What is it? This is what we spend. This is where it goes. A bucket is outcomes. How are our students doing relative to that? And then a third is sort of delivery and demographics. And that's delivery at the level of, like you were saying, Peter, how many high schools do we have? How big are they? How many students are they serving? And so those are the ones I'm hearing. Maybe there are others, but it feels like a lot would be able to be coalesced into those buckets. And I wonder if what we do is identify if the desire is for the steering group to engage in a picture of the system we're dealing with, it is simultaneously looking at the data and deciding what we don't have and then figuring out how we're going to get it. And I think that is a conversation worth having. And it's probably not just worth having, it is the right next conversation to have. I'm going to pause. Are those the right three categories? And then maybe it is helpful, Nicole, to see, and others might have ideas they've been working on.
I think those are going to the right buckets. I would offer a couple other categories we might want to look at. So I think to Representative Conlon's point, there is a need just to at first provide a kind of a profile, a basic overview that kind of gets to number of schools, number of SUs, districts, those type of things broken down. Another category I would add is demographics, and I would look at both school and community demographics, enrollment trends, facility conditions, staffing, and student conditions, and budget. So those are some of the kind of the buckets that we're looking at. There probably are subcategories of your buckets, Megan, honestly, as I walked through them.
No, that's good. I mean, I think that's consistency. Nicole, do you want to run through your list and see what you would add to, or how you'd round out some of this?
Sure. And I'm happy to send this along, but I do think we've talked about a breakdown of the $1.9 billion education payment, which is the payment that goes to districts by object and function. So we know how are we spending the money. I had statewide demographic projections as well. Education fund sources and uses for the last decade. So in addition to the education payment, there's a host of legislative programs that are funded out of the education fund. What's that trend line look like in terms of the amounts? Special education payment, what's happening there that sort of relates to the work we're supposed to be rooted in with Act 173. And then also looking at the history of sources into the ed fund. Maybe this is more the ed finance group, but looking at not just property tax, but what's happened with sales use, meals and rooms, all that stuff, Medicaid funds over time. Current state of governance. So how many supervisory districts do we have? How many students do they serve? How many towns do they serve? What's the general cost per equalized pupil for both supervisory districts and supervisory unions? We're supposed to look at the impacts of tuitioning. So I think we need to know the number of districts that pay tuition, the total dollars paid to independent schools, what's going out of state, what's staying in state, special ed out of district payments or placements. Those are all issues we're supposed to look at per the act. I think staffing is important to look at, not just by district, but for the Agency of Education, what's happened with staffing there. And what's happened with compensation? What's the differentiation around compensation district by district? So like minimum, looking at the salary schedules, what's the min point? What's the max point? There's a lot of variability around the state in terms of compensation. We're supposed to look at health benefits. So we need to better understand how does school employee health benefits compare to state and municipal employees? Looking at our outcomes, so the EQS outcomes and the equity index, looking whether there's correlation between spending and outcomes, district size, poverty, race, like what, I'm assuming that's a lot of the work that the agency is engaged in. Those are the ones that I came up with looking at the statute, knowing generally what's available through existing data sources.
I'm wondering if it would be, and I still think this begs the question of, is this the next steering group's work session or full commission? But it's feeling like steering group. That's up to you. But if we could take this list that and I've taken some notes, we'll have some notes to capture it. And it is looking at, in these categories, cost, outcomes, and delivery/demographics, the list, and populate that with the list, and then spend some time on what exists, what doesn't exist, what do we need in order to do our work. That's a work session. That's a work session item. And that's probably the next work session item that we would need to do before we can go too much farther. Do folks agree? And it may be that, I mean, Zoe, you'll be able to know and potentially link, right? It really depends on what the data item is, and it may be that it's there. And then if it's there and it's worthwhile for us to look at it, great. If not, but it's a kind of an analysis of what do we have and what we don't have.
I think that would be quite helpful, and if all the committee members can share with you, Megan, like what they're looking for in terms of the data points, and then I can cross-reference. I'll share with you what we're trying to gather at this point, and I do think it's a helpful exercise. I'd be happy to take that on in terms of at least what the agency could provide at this point around what we have and what we don't have. And I think there was another question there around the next step. I think there is value in the steering committee coming together again and kind of thinking through that and really unpacking the data so that we can be thoughtful around how we frame that, and also how we identify where there might be gaps and how we're pursuing to fill those. And I think to someone's earlier point, that will inform, I think, the scope of work for the consultant, right? That is great that we have that as a resource. And I think we certainly want to leverage that opportunity, but we're not quite there yet to know what specifications we need. And this first activity, I think, will be very instructive for us.
Great. Just logistically, and also kind of a point of order, I imagine, I think the most effective thing would be for folks to send their list, if it exists now, or if you are going to create it afterwards, to me, so that I can compile it as a whole. I think we want to avoid back and forth over email so that we're not running afoul of open meeting law. And then I will consolidate that and then put that back out to the group as pre-read material for whatever our next meeting is. Zoe, you and I can connect about whether or not the pre-read, whether or not you'll have had a chance to say what we have and don't have, or whether you'll do that live at the next meeting. So we can talk about that. So if folks, I have a good list and we'll have what the notes are, but you may think of some things afterwards. So send those to me. So coming back to some of the logistics, and we don't have to stay at logistics, but I'm just going to say out loud, I think that meeting needs to happen before the next commission meeting. And it has to happen because it will inform the work plan that we then propose to the commission. And the commission does need to approve the work plan, which is due by September 15th. So we should just have that in mind. This group needs to have a work session, at least one, enough to be ready to create a draft of something to go to the full commission. That's all. And then I think the way that I'm seeing this now is the idea of how the commission will address each element of the charge is going to be defined and informed by this next piece. And so I'm not sure that we would be able to do that here necessarily. Nicole, go ahead, because then I have a question for you, Zoe, because maybe there is a piece of it that we could come a little ready for. Nicole.
Sorry to interrupt a chain of thought, but I also think, given the deadline of December, that movement on the formation of the Education Finance Subcommittee feels particularly important, and great to have that group identified and either invited to that commission meeting where the data gets shared, so because that is the only committee where there will be sort of external folks. It feels like if we can talk about that today, that seems timely to me.
Yes, thank you. I think that's worth a conversation right now. My follow-up, Zoe, was more about whether or not I was thinking about the engagement piece and maybe coming to the next meeting with a little bit more information to share with the group about the listen and learn tour. So it's a different agenda item. Let's stick with Nicole's question. I think that's really important. I would love the steering group to talk about what that committee is. The law does say that the steering committee can appoint non-commission members to that group, which is a different thing even than consultant. I think those are two. That's an and. So I think that you should talk about that. Yes, Peter.
Great. Yeah, I've been trying to give this a fair bit of thought and think about, specifically people. Yeah, I guess one thing I would say is that I think that this subcommittee was envisioned as coming back to the legislature with certain cost containment strategies that the legislature could then take up for debate and potential implementation. So I've got names in mind, but I guess one not named, but a position in particular is I do feel that this subcommittee needs to have representation from the administration. This has been one of their chief messages. And so I think that the subcommittee needs to have, whether it's Secretary Saunders or somebody else, but just that I think definitely a spot for somebody to represent the position of the administration and sort of with the ability to present their ideas.
I agree with that. I've had names suggested to me, but I've also thought the minority leader in the Senate is also a member of the Finance Committee. So starts out having been part of the entire debate, has been there for a while, which is a possibility. Of the names that some people have suggested to me, including that one, I haven't talked to any of them. I don't know if any of them are willing to serve, but it's a place to start. We've had several commissions. I know the House Committee on Ways and Means did an awful lot of work this year on possible alternative funding structures, and that would be would be good information to have. It would keep us from reinventing the wheel. Been told they needed more information, but maybe we can find that. But I think it's important that we get a balanced committee. We get people that are delivering educational services on the ground. We get representatives from the administration and the legislature, and we might even consider an average citizen, but that we do get a balanced committee so that all points of view are heard. And the tax commissioner is a member of this commission, and the tax department has a lot of information and a lot of ability to run suggestions and find out what our best idea will actually, what the outcomes will be in terms of revenue. I'm trying to trace down, and Peter, you were on the study committee on income-based funding, and I couldn't find it was a working group, so I don't think there was a formal report. There's nothing on the joint fiscal website, but I know there was an awful lot of documentation done, so I'm trying to trace that down because that is a suggestion that comes up a lot, and it has been looked at. There is documentation out there, so trying to just run a lot of that stuff down. School construction money. I don't know if there is any or where it is. It used to be bonded money. But if we come up with some solutions, there will probably be a need to do some construction or repair or rehab. I have a $328 million bill, which was the report of what it will take to solve the immediate health and safety needs in our schools.
So Anne, I'm gonna pull us
So-
back a little bit. I
Yeah,
think the
so I
goal
think-
here is to try to
I think-
identify the committee itself,
Right.
and the other
information.
who will then need to address all of those things and gather that data. The only other thing I would offer is there's two ways of well, there's many ways, but there's more than one way to engage various viewpoints. And the group is going to want to be thoughtful about the size of this group because that it's a pretty heavy lift, and many of the sort of perspectives that need to be involved, there are many ways to get those perspectives in that may or may not include having those perspectives on the committee itself. So that's just a thought. Nicole.
I wonder whether it makes sense for us to agree on sort of an ideal size of that group and some, expertise that would be needed. And then we can each think about who we might recommend and bring those and maybe even reach out to those folks to see if you were asked, would you be willing to serve, so that we can make a decision at the next meeting. If that sounds like a good use of today's time, what do people think in terms of just relative size and expertise that we might need?
Yeah, Peter.
I do think it's something that we need to try to tackle today. This is a group that has to get started and get working as soon as possible. And I just would remind us that it doesn't have to exclusively be people who are not on the commission. I think that some people on the commission could also be on this. We may want to offer that to the other commission members if they're interested to be part of it.
And I would ask the administration who they would like to have on it. if we, if we agree that that's important, that there be somebody from the administration, if they want to have a member of the commission or they want to have another voice.
I think the administration would welcome that. And I think there's a lot of value in having representative from the administration. I think there's also a lot of value in having someone who has deep education, policy, and economic expertise and economic background. And that can be someone from Vermont or not, right? I think that also is something to balance as well as we are engaging in this discussion. In terms of size, I do think we want this group to be nimble, right? So I think smaller as opposed to a larger group that might be more challenging to manage. And I do think, identifying some recommendations in short order would be helpful. It's likely, and just from kind of my vantage point, this may be the area where we might want some additional expertise from a consultant to do some more sophisticated modeling. I think the cost containment strategies have been put out there, and there's a range that have been, presented over time. And the question is really, how do we actually do the sophisticated modeling to understand what would that look like, and how would that impact, different SUs and districts across the state.
I have a bit of a clarifying question. Is the intention for, and I guess this would be Peter or anyone really, is the intention for this steering group to also be the finance group? And so what we're looking and thinking of this mostly in terms of size. So are we adding to this group of 6, or is this a separate group altogether?
My interpretation is separate group altogether, to be appointed by the steering committee.
Thank you.
I mean, it can obviously include overlapping people.
Yep.
And I would also echo somewhere in the vicinity of less than 10, maybe 7.
Yep.
I'm thinking 5 to 7. It's an optimum group size.
Thank you. And that answer answered my other question, because I was actually wondering whether or not the administration's representation was covered by the administration's appointments to this steering group. And so no, this is a different group altogether. So do you feel comfortable putting names out right now to this group so that someone pointed out, reaching out to these folks and having a list longer than the number of spaces we have is probably useful, because you need to know if the people we're talking about, and I don't know if the people you're thinking are names or positions, but if there's going to be some reach out in advance of future meetings, that would probably be helpful. Jennifer.
This might go without saying, but I would like to suggest that Craig be on the committee.
The resources. I have a volunteer. The superintendent from Lamoille South, Brian Henrity, who also is the superintendent in Stowe, is getting his PhD in ed financing, and he has called me twice and would be very interested in being part of this. I told him I would put his name out and see what you think, but he is a superintendent.
It's making me wonder if just in general, we should be talking about position or skill set and then applying potential names to that, either here or elsewhere. Not actually, that was not in response and to that name at all, or either name. But I think otherwise we may all end up with sorry, my lights will turn off. We may end up with a very long list. And I think if we talk a little bit about, so we've got about a size and we've talked a lot about expertise. I wonder if including people that this may be consultant expertise, but for really deep dive modeling. And I think I jumped in front of you, Nicole, accidentally. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I do think it is important to, in terms of expertise, have somebody who understands the educational, the constitutional underpinnings of our funding system. So
Brigham decision.
yes, the Brigham decision and subsequent decisions, and is can offer that input as part of this process.
I'm also
Right.
just, sorry.
I had, this may be more of a clarification. I would guess I would see this subcommittee, or I guess let me put the question out there. Are we seeing this subcommittee as strictly fulfilling the December 15th deadline to propose cost containment strategies to the legislature to be considered? Or is this going to be potentially the sort of Ed Finance Committee subcommittee that exists for the entire 18-month life of the commission?
I was assuming it was the latter.
Yeah, I was assuming
Because
it's going to run.
If, and part of the charge is to look at potential alternatives to the existing funding system. I would hope that any short-term or interim cost containment measures would be aligned with a general direction, right? That there not be a total disconnect between 1 year it's this and the next year we're doing something totally.
Mhm.
I mean, we're not going to be in a position to recommend changes, undoing the entire funding system in January, because budgets will already be done, right? So there's a sequencing of this, and I do think it makes sense for this subcommittee. I personally feel like this is a pretty high stakes appointment, and I'm not comfortable with someone's volunteered, so let's throw their name. I think that there needs to be. I don't know how to go about making a decision around appointments, but I would appreciate an opportunity to have. It wasn't on the agenda for today, right? And so I'm not prepared to offer suggestions and a sort of rationale for why a specific individual. But I do think if it's on our agenda for next meeting to appoint this committee, that will allow the folks that we represent, we're connected to sort of reach out and express interest and provide input. I'm not prepared to do that. I just wanted to start the conversation to make sure that doesn't get lost.
I agree, and I would offer one other wondering, and then Jennifer, and then Zoe, and that is your group will want to talk about. I don't think the intention is for the group to be wholly made up of non-commission members, but commission members plus. And so again, part of your discussion should be, and if we can make this about perspectives and areas of expertise that need to sit on it, then the first line would be membership within the commission that meets that criteria. The second line would then be, are we missing areas of expertise or perspectives? And then how do we secure those, either from outside members and consultants? So Jennifer, and then Zoe.
Well, as I think about perspectives, I think it would be helpful to have someone who has experience outside of Vermont. And I sort of alluded to this when we met last week. A state that, there are certain states that I think are more analogous to Vermont than others. And so, perhaps just picking a state, Texas wouldn't be necessarily helpful because I feel like their educational model is very different. But I think if there is someone from another state that has experience that would be helpful to us as we sort of think about where we are and where we're trying to go, it would be helpful to have that outside perspective.
Thanks, Jennifer. Zoe?
I agree with this direction of really specifying the expertise as we then contemplate some recommendations that we could bring forward. So I'm supportive of the level of expertise people have shared. both kind of deep internal expertise and I think external outside of the state is also helpful to have a kind of a balanced conversation. The only other item I want to bring up as we think about this may go to the next item around the charge for the subcommittee is looking at opportunities for even shorter term recommendations. I think in the broader commission, this was brought up that a lot of these decisions that will be contemplated by the General Assembly will have major impacts on school budgeting and operations. And so as this committee is exploring those options, even for this budgeting cycle, to begin to share some ideas so that on the ground and in the field, SUs and districts and schools can really begin to explore what that would look like in terms of doing budgets in a kind of a different scenario. And are there opportunities to establish some shorter term, even kind of strategic budgeting decisions now for this cycle would be, I think, a question we would ask.
Okay, so I'm hearing that an agenda item for our time as a steering group is identifying the expertise and what are the voices that need to be sitting on the financial subcommittee. The conversation so far is someone who deeply understands Vermont's educational, constitutional focus and commitment to equity, and then also expertise in education funding outside of Vermont, but in similar demographics and size. And that group should also talk about the charge of the subcommittee. I am going to do go ahead, Jennifer.
Thanks. Sorry. I want to go back to something that Zoe had said a few minutes ago, where the idea that maybe the consultant could also serve on this education finance subcommittee. So I'm curious, I hadn't really considered that. And I guess I would love this group to think about it a little bit more, in addition to, I'm assuming that would then be part of, what the consultant would be paid, because it feels like the consultant would be working in a couple of different roles.
Yes, I think for me, there were kind of two parts to that. One is some of the scope of work might be defined for what this committee needs in terms of additional expertise. And then I think the second piece, which Jennifer's mentioning, is a facilitator. Because these are, I think, very challenging conversations, and it might be helpful to have a third-party facilitator in these discussions.
Thanks, Zoe. So I think I'm going to bring us back, if it's at least do a time check. I want to make sure that we can be allowing some public comment at 3:45, the way the agenda has listed. So we did want to come back to maybe not the absolute finite logistics of scheduling, but just sounds like this steering group needs a work session. That is the next thing to be scheduled. And someone threw out half day, but it does seem like it's a work session, not a shorter meeting. I also, part of my putting on the agenda to think about the full commission meeting dates is it will take agency staff some time to just get the ball rolling on scheduling those. And so again, we're not trying to pick dates today, but I do just wonder if the steering group could have a little bit of a conversation around the structure of just getting steering committee meetings scheduled and warned in advance. I think would also be helpful for the public, because folks want to attend and hear, and they want to know where they're going to be, because these will rotate. So I am anticipating it would be something like the third Monday, and that's just the name, that's the day that came in, right? The third Monday of every month, or the second Tuesday of every month. I would imagine we're going to want some kind of cadence like that. But the questions that I would have what is the right length of those meetings, and what is the time of day, frankly, because we need to be sensitive to I understand there is some reimbursement for commission members, but not a lot. And there is travel involved, because although there's a hybrid option, I think there will be an on-site in every county. So are we talking about morning, mid-afternoon, evening? So I'm just wondering if you could have a little bit of a conversation about that so that agency folks can start to get a scheduling poll out to the full commission. Anne.
Yeah, if you schedule it on Mondays, assuming this commission is going to continue to meet during the legislative session, we won't have scheduling problems. Plus, anybody that works for the state won't run into, but I'm scheduled to speak before this committee on Tuesday. So Mondays is a good option in that sense.
Thanks, Anne. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Other thoughts? Yep, Peter.
Thanks. I do think making it on a set date will save us from lots of doodle polls about which Monday works for everybody. Whatever that is, I don't know. I obviously agree with Senator Cummings about Mondays would be probably a good choice. It does seem to me we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I would hate to see these meetings be any shorter than a half a day, whether that is a morning or an afternoon. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion, but I think they got to be probably a minimum of 3 hours, if not more. You know, I mean, we're probably going to be spending a lot of time listening to people, and I think we need to be prepared to do that.
Thanks, Peter.
In terms of frequency, are we generally thinking the commission would meet once a month? If we chart out, and then the steering committee, every 2 weeks, or I'm totally supportive of Mondays. I think because of the travel that may be involved and going to different counties, probably doing it in the afternoon as opposed to morning just gives people more time to get where we're going to go. And I think, yeah, some sort of set regular, second Monday of the month, this is when the commission meets. Makes sense to me, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the relative frequency.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's me that potentially put out monthly. I do. So it's 14 meetings is the number of meetings that's defined to rotate. And it's an 18-month commission. So it's a little less than monthly. And then obviously up to 30 all told, but that includes subcommittee meetings. So it may make sense to set up and assume monthly. I also assume next summer often commissions won't meet in July. I know it's July right now, but so I think if we aim for Monday minus a couple of Mondays, that might make sense. Jennifer.
I do like the Monday suggestion. I think it makes a lot of sense. My thought was, if we scheduled it to begin at like some 9 or 10, just to give people a chance to get to where they're going, because to get from one end of the state to the other could be 3 hours. But I think I would rather do a morning meeting than an afternoon meeting, only because on the flip side, and thinking about, December, January, February, driving back in the dark, it feels better to drive back in the daytime.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's a fair consideration. And I wonder to this group, the extent to which participation is limited when it's in the morning. Participation by the public. Obviously, there is a hybrid option. Meetings will be recorded, and the meeting itself is not the only way of engaging. So there will be other sessions. So I think I just need to say that out loud to folks who wonder, but if it's at 10 a.m. and I have to work, how will I participate? I think I would just say that if that's where it lands so that commission members can get there and do their work, then that just means we need to lean more heavily on an engagement process that is separate from the meetings themselves and then gets brought in. So that wasn't a question I was posing, just sort of saying that I think given our comments so far that will come up. Okay, I think that I will.
I just want to add one thing. I don't have the bill in front of me. I need to look at it again. I don't think the full commission is required to meet in all 14 counties. I think a subcommittee meeting can fulfill that duty as well.
Thank you.
And I would also just say, once we get rolling, we're going to have active subcommittees. So it would almost seem like the second Tuesday or Monday of the month, the full commission, the fourth Monday is a committee time.
Yep.
So just to confirm, because I'm looking at, this is page 5 of Act 183, at least one meeting of the commission as a whole or a subcommittee of the commission shall be held in each county. I mean, personally, I think it would be helpful to have a meeting of the full commission. I think that feels better in terms of meeting that charge, but I think, having a subcommittee is also okay.
It may be helpful to know that that's an option if we are having trouble achieving the full commission. I do suspect the spirit of this is to have as much opportunity for engagement as possible. So I think it makes sense to start ourselves on a path. It also is going to depend a little bit on location in each county. We do want a place that has effective technology for a good hybrid meeting. I know one of the a third thing for the commission is to talk about public engagement, public comment, how it will be collected, how it will be shared, things like that. Jennifer.
Sorry, just thinking through about like what is the sweet spot to schedule a meeting, and my suspicion is that no time's going to work for everybody, not for us, not for members of the public. But if we had a meeting that spanned lunchtime, would that work? Because then everyone takes a lunch at some point during the day, and maybe we could hold our public comment for the meetings at that point, just to allow members of the public access.
I think there's oh, sorry. Go ahead, Zoe.
I was just saying, and I think for the larger commission where we would expect, I think, to have probably more public participation, we do want to think about accessibility. So certainly lunchtime is one option, but also after work hours.
Yeah, I think what will be most effective is for the scheduling poll to look at a morning time frame, an afternoon into evening time frame, perhaps a midday time frame, and then we look at that all together, partially to see what the availability is of the commission itself, and then we can sort of discuss. That was one of my thoughts about an afternoon meeting. And yes, travel is going to be a challenge, arguably challenge in the morning. I mean, travel in the morning on a snowy day is hard too. But the advantage of an afternoon meeting is if it's paired with an engagement session, it could be that the commission does its work from 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and then there is a more publicly facing event. Again, all of that is for the commission itself to decide, but I think what will happen is the full commission will get, I will probably logistically connect with our support folks at the agency and talk about the various doodle polls. So thank you for that conversation. I think we have enough direction for the full commission. The subcommittee, so this group, I keep using the term subcommittee incorrectly, the steering group will need to come together with agenda items to zero in on the expertise and who needs to sit on the financial steering committee. You all will share with me any additional data related requests because the second agenda item will be to look at the data that needs to frame our work so that we can have a conversation about what we have and what we don't have yet. I believe those are the 2 main agenda items for the steering group's next agenda. Did I miss? I have this idea that there was a third, but maybe the third was just the scheduling of the full commission. Okay. Is there anything else that we should come back around to? Anything you want to say? Actually, I guess what I would say is anything you would want to throw out there for scheduling of the steering group meeting. which I would imagine is going to need to happen in the next 2 weeks, I would assume. Because we need to have a commission meeting in time for them to react to a work plan in order to have that adopted by the 15th. So is there anything you would want me to make sure our support folks have for scheduling of that? Nicole?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, my strong preference would be that we meet every 2 weeks and we get that on the calendar. And it be, again, a regular meeting. I don't have any restrictions in terms of vacations.
Do folks agree with every 2 weeks, at least through December? We can always cancel a meeting with advance notice. So, okay. And I don't know if I misheard this. Are we thinking of that also would stick to Mondays? I think someone said it would be a different Monday potentially than the other one. Is that easier for them to get that scheduling going? Okay. Okay, I will work with them on that. Okay. So if there is nothing else, I'm going to give just another kind of a similar reminder and frame for those who want to make public comment. We will have about 15 minutes, which may not be enough time to capture everyone's. In a second, I'll ask you to raise your hand if you would like to have comment. Depending on how many hands, we would probably be limiting folks to about 2 to 3 minutes. And what I would just remind everyone is that, these are the same words that I said last week, but it is part of our work to design engagement and community input and opportunities to do that. So we will be doing that so that there's multiple ways to participate. I also, a couple of pieces of feedback that came after the first commission meeting are where to direct written public comments that folks don't have a chance to speak to, and just additional written public comments that come through. I am working with agency folks on the best way to direct those to me. A few folks have done that to me directly through email. We're not sure we can do it this way. We would like to have a standalone email that collects that so that it's easy to publish. But if you go to the website, it's not going to be there yet. So just understand that. So we will have a mechanism for people to submit comments outside of the meeting. And with that, Jennifer, I'm going to let you go first before we start.
Thanks. So I'm just curious because I know that I've received emails from various people with regard to the commission. Do you want us to forward them to you, CC you? I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I would say to me, there's a slight distinction between someone reaching out to you in the capacity that you represent, simply saying, I have this input for you. So for example, I'm here as a member of the Act 173 advisory group. And if I had a piece of input that said, hey, from that perspective, I want to make sure you share this, that's between you and the person. If the person is providing input or feedback that they would like to go to the full commission, I would have you forward that to me. And then those will be forwarded back to the full group. I have at least one, actually two, pieces of written feedback that I will be distributing back to the full commission. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And we will start our next commission meeting with just a little, I'd like to start with a rundown of here's how public comment will look. Here's where you can send comments outside of meetings. Here's where we are. So I will try to frame that. So I have Herb Olson. Do you want to go first? And just a reminder, folks, say your name before you share your comment. Thank you.
Sorry about that, folks. I'm muted there. Listen, I think you've done a great job this afternoon. It's you have to fix the entire healthcare education system. Good luck. The couple of comments, and you might have already contemplated this already. It sounds like you're going to look for a lot of data, a lot of research. I think you may have talked about this, but I think it'd be helpful to have some place where the data and information that comes in as it's coming in is available. Obviously to the full commission, but also to the public. Whether that's by a website or whatever. I think that would be helpful for transparency purposes. The second thought that I have, one of the hot button issues has to do with issues around school closing, school consolidation. There's been a lot of people have a lot of hot feelings about those issues and very divergent feelings. I think it might be helpful to have some good factual information, especially around the financials. I know that in our district, when a school was proposed to be, actually 3 schools were proposed to be closed, there was a divergence of opinion around, what the financial costs and benefits of that were. We ultimately, with the help of a district researcher, showed that the financial savings were a lot less than imagined, but that might differ from school to school and situation to situation. So getting a grip on that issue in a factual as opposed to anecdotal manner might be a good thing to do. Thanks very much. I hope I'm in the 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Herb. Okay, next I have Paul Anderson.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Paul Anderson from Fairfax. And I just got my tax bill in the mail today, and I'm certainly not a happy camper. I think this commission's primary focus needs to be on reducing the cost of education in Vermont. What are we, number 2 in the nation? I spent 30 plus years in industry. In industry, when we wanted to get better and fix things, we looked at who's doing it better than we are. And certainly there's a 50 percentile of states that are doing it better than we are in terms of cost per student. And I think the commission needs to look at those states. I'm not saying we need to be last in the nation, okay? But we need to get back towards the center of spending in this country. And I think the commission needs to look at those states' budgets, what they spend on education per student, and figure out a model that gets us back to the 50th percentile and not number 2 in the nation. And yes, let's be frank, that needs significant increases in class sizes. It means significant reductions in special education, which has gone crazy in this state. It means less administrators. It means a lot less, frankly, than that Vermont taxpayers can afford. So I think the commission needs to look at the data from those states and benchmark what they're doing, because they're doing a hell of a lot better than we are. So I hope you take that into account as you move forward. And I'll make sure my representatives know my point of view as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I have Rick next.
Hello, thank you for taking my comment. Rick Dustin Eichler, I'm the principal at the Dothan Brook School down in Hartford, Vermont. I just wanted to say that I appreciated your comments around data sets, and I would like to encourage the commission to look more broadly at data rather than looking at rear-facing data that identifies gaps, but looking at data around what we hope and dream our schools will be like, what our communities are looking for in schools, what our economy is looking for in schools, and within this really trying to engage groups from the voice of marginalized populations to make sure that we are creating a vision for education that's truly inclusive of all. So I really appreciate that. And then from the lens of school funding, also making sure that we're including voices from other agencies within the states, because in my role as principals, I see lots of redundancy between what we are having to do in schools and the work of other agencies within the state. And I believe that if you dig into that there may be some real cost savings. So again, thank you for your work. It's much appreciated from us in the field.
Thanks, Rick. Jay?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. For those of you that don't remember me, I was heavily involved in the debate over Act 46 back in 2019, and primarily concerned from our district was that we had one school, at least one school, was a gold medallion school, had extremely high student performance in a district that historically had spending that was well below the state average. We're very, very frugal up here. And as a matter of fact, unlike other school districts, we reserved our ESSER funds strictly for capital expenditures to improve the condition of our school. Most notably, we added a $4 million addition to the Franklin Elementary School that didn't cost the taxpayers a dime. So as far as our tax bills and so forth, sure, they went up a little bit, but it's manageable. So much so that we're able to budget capital improvements in our school. At Missisquoi Valley Union High School, we're involved in replacing the roofs at the present time. So we have a committee on the board. Of course, I have to acknowledge the fact that I used to be the chairman of the Missisquoi board. It's a union high school that was placed in a forced merger. But as much as I hate to say this, Act 46 actually allowed us to cherry pick, so to speak, for less of a better word, the things that were beneficial to our schools and to avoid the things that would affect our ability to keep what we felt was important. So I like to think that we're probably one of the more successful schools as it pertains to implementing Act 46. So we want to try to preserve what we've got here. So we're a little bit nervous about a proposal or about a recommendation that might have significant impact on what has been working quite well for us up here. It's one of the primary concerns that we have now is the discussion about equity and educational opportunities. We do normally our student population, which unlike other schools is not suffering from significant reductions. For example, we have in-district school choice, where we're able to utilize our elementary schools more effectively to accommodate the needs of students based on what school has the services that would be very helpful to them on an individual basis. All of our schools have started out with Franklin being community-based schools pursuant to Act 67. And so we utilize everything that you can possibly imagine that exists within our schools to enhance the educational experience. As a result of our unified union school district, we are now continuing those or allowing those initiatives to bleed into our other schools in our district, which is having pretty impressive result. We also have agreements with other regional tech centers where we have the early college program, early ECP program, or college credit program. So we have a number of students participating on that with 3 different regional schools. So we're very cautious about when you start crunching data, that the data may not be universal to all schools. So when you think about the data that you're trying to crunch to assist you in making decisions and recommendations, it's not as if there's a single data that would fit all schools in the state of Vermont, because some of our schools are more successful than others. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought.
Thank you, Jay.
I appreciate the time, and old habits, I guess, are hard to break for these old school board members.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public?
Megan, Ray Nails is on my second page with a hand up. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Hi. I just want to say that, and I'm coming at this I'm a retired union president, so I just want to make sure that the committee is having a frank conversation. You know, you have a losing battle. Vermonters are already aware we have one of the highest per pupil spendings in the country. We have declining student populations. We have people leaving our state and record other numbers, yet our school budgets are exploding. You have a people personnel problem. My elected representative, he put all the blame on healthcare costs, like for other teachers. Like any industry, when you have less customers, you have to reduce your force. You need to get a smaller workforce. You need to have a more efficient workforce. To keep it at this spending level is unsustainable for Vermonters. We've already spoken. And we expect our elected representatives to work with our governor, who we all elected. He's one of the most popular governors in the state. We expect you to reach across the aisle. And at a time when our infrastructures are crumbling and we're sitting with schools that are empty, you know, it would be one thing if the school and the school boards like were coming forward with year-round schools, summer programs, so my son like can continue like to work on his math instead of being told it's not profitable and to go online. So I just want this board and this body to take a hard look and approach at your workforce. It's too big. It's too bloated. You need to start offering early retirements. You need to start offering and getting younger people in here. Like when I look at my district up here, CVU, and it's $101 million budget. Over 53% of these educators are at the top of the pay scale, making $101,000 a year, working 162 days a year. It's unsustainable. You cannot keep this up. So the funding level, it can't be an income tax because we're already taxed out of our butts already. You got to do better. And the first thing that we have to do is take a serious conversation at reducing our workforce. We have less kids like than we did like 10 years ago. It's going down every year, yet our school budgets are going up in double digit. And my last comment is, you pull in like to this parking lot up here at CVU, the only people that are leaving quicker like than the students are the teachers. It's not like it was like back when I was tutored at home by my fifth grade teacher. Those days are over. Vermonters are sick of it. We're sick of it. And you guys got to do better for us. We need you to do better for us. It cannot continue like it is. Madam Secretary, good luck. I'm glad that they brought in an outside voice to speak reason. We cannot keep doing it like we've been doing this. Good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Nicole, for catching that. Any other member of the public? We probably have room for one more, if there is anyone. Okay. With that, I believe we are adjourned. Steering group members, you will get some scheduling polls shortly. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks, Megan.
Megan.
Thanks.